In the late summer of 1941, the historic city of Leningrad stood as a symbol of Russian culture and resilience, unaware of the impending shadow. The air was filled with the normal sounds of life, the hum of traffic, the laughter of children, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the summer garden. Operation Barbarossa had been unleashed, and the German war machine, Army Group North, was advancing with terrifying speed across the Soviet plains. By September 8th, the final land route to the city was severed by German forces. Leningrad, a city of 3 million souls, was suddenly and completely encircled. The initial reaction among the populace was one of disbelief, a collective inability to grasp the totality of their isolation. Then, the Luftwaffe began its relentless aerial bombardment, shattering the city's peace. One of the first and most catastrophic strikes targeted the Badaev warehouses, where a significant portion of the city's food reserves were stored. Rivers of molten, burning sugar flowed through the streets, a surreal and horrifying omen of the starvation to come. The sweet, acrid smell of burning food supplies filled the air, a scent of despair that would haunt the survivors for years. With the warehouses destroyed, the city's fate was sealed. A slow, agonizing death by starvation was now inevitable. As autumn deepened, the first pangs of true hunger began to grip the population. Ration cards were introduced, the daily bread allowance shrinking with each passing week. Soon, the official ration for a civilian was a mere 125 grams of bread per day, a slice composed more of sawdust and cellulose than actual flour. The first winter of the siege arrived with unparalleled ferocity, a brutal, biting cold that seeped into every corner of the city. Fuel supplies ran out almost immediately, leaving homes without heat in the face of plummeting temperatures. Water pipes froze and burst, cutting off the supply of clean water and forcing citizens to fetch it from the frozen Neva River. Electricity failed, plunging the once vibrant city into a profound and suffocating darkness. Families huddled together in a single room, burning books, furniture, and floorboards for a flicker of warmth. Hunger became an all-consuming torment, driving people to desperate measures. They boiled leather belts and briefcases to create a gelatinous, barely edible broth. Wallpaper was stripped from walls, the paste scraped off and boiled for its supposed potato starch content. Pets, once beloved companions, disappeared from the city's streets and homes. The city's cats and dogs were gone, followed by rats and crows, until no living creature was safe. Death became a mundane, everyday occurrence. People would collapse from starvation on the street, in breadlines, or in their frozen apartments. Survivors, too weak to dig graves in the frozen earth, would wrap their loved ones in sheets and leave them in the street. The only sound in the silent streets was often the whisper of wooden sleds carrying the dead to collection points. Yet, amidst the horror, a lifeline emerged, the road of life. This was a perilous ice road forged across the surface of the frozen Lake Ladoga. Braver drivers in Gazat trucks ferried vital supplies into the city and evacuated the weakest civilians on the return journey. The journey was a constant dance with death, under the threat of German artillery and air raids. The ice, thin and treacherous, would often crack, swallowing trucks and their precious cargo into the frigid depths. These drivers were heroes. Their convoys a fragile thread connecting Leningrad to the outside world. The supplies they brought were never enough to end the starvation, but they provided a flicker of hope. The road of life allowed for the evacuation of over 500,000 people, mostly women and children. Even in the depths of despair, the city's cultural spirit refused to be extinguished. Scientists at the Vavilov Institute of Plant Industry protected a priceless collection of seeds and tubers from both the starving populace and rats. They starved to death surrounded by tons of edible material, safeguarding the future of agriculture. The most defiant act of cultural resistance came in the form of music. Composer Dmitri Shostakovich, who had initially served as a volunteer firefighter, had written his symphony Number 7, the Leningrad. The score was flown into the besieged city by a special aircraft. The city's surviving musicians were gathered to form an orchestra. Many were so weak from hunger they had to be helped onto the stage. On August 9th, 1942, in the Grand Hall of the Philharmonia, the Leningrad Symphony was performed. The performance was broadcast via loudspeakers across the city and, defiantly towards the German front lines. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a city that refused to be broken. German soldiers who heard it were reportedly demoralized, realizing they were fighting people of immense spiritual strength. The summer of 1942 saw another form of resistance: victory gardens. Every available patch of land, parks, squares and boulevards, was turned over to the cultivation of vegetables. This small harvest provided a crucial, if meager, supplement to the city's diet. Despite these glimmers of hope, the dying continued relentlessly through 1942 and into 1943. The city was a ghost of its former self, its population decimated, its buildings scarred. In January 1943, the Red Army launched Operation Iskra. Operation Spark. After ferocious fighting, Soviet forces managed to breach the German lines south of Lake Ladoga, a narrow land corridor, only 8 to 11 kilometers wide, thus opened to the city. The blockade was not fully lifted, as the corridor was still within range of German artillery. But it was a crucial breakthrough. Supplies began to flow more steadily into Leningrad, bringing relief and a renewed sense of hope. The city began to slowly, painfully, come back to life. The struggle continued for another full year, with shelling and hardship remaining a part of daily life. Finally, in January 1944, the Soviet Leningrad and Novgorod strategic offensive began. This was the final push, designed to throw the German army back from the city's gates for good. The offensive was overwhelming, and the exhausted German forces were pushed back decisively. On January 27, 1944, the siege was officially declared over. After 872 days of unimaginable horror, Leningrad was free. The city erupted in celebration, the sky lit not by explosions of war, but by triumphant fireworks. Survivors emerged from their cellars and frozen apartments, their bodies emaciated, but their spirits unbroken. The scale of the devastation was immense. The city was a landscape of ruins. The human cost was staggering, with estimates suggesting over 1 million civilian deaths. The Siege of Leningrad remains one of the longest and most destructive sieges in modern history. It stands as a horrifying testament to the brutality of war and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The story of the 900 days is a story of suffering, sacrifice, and ultimate, hard-won victory. The city would be rebuilt, but the memory of the blockade would be forever etched into its stones and its soul. The initial German advance was a blitzkrieg, a lightning war that stunned Soviet defenses. Citizens were mobilized to dig anti-tank ditches on the city's outskirts, a desperate, futile effort. The sky above Leningrad became a battleground for fighter planes. The first food shortages were felt in the city's bakeries, where queues grew longer each day. Winter transformed the city's golden domes and spires into ice-crowned specters. The silence of the city was a heavy, oppressive blanket, broken only by the wind or distant shelling. Children, their faces old with hunger, learned to navigate the treacherous, frozen streets. The concept of a meal devolved into a scientific calculation of minimal, life-sustaining calories. To fall ill was often a death sentence, with hospitals lacking medicine, heat, or even bandages. The city's scholars and librarians worked tirelessly to protect priceless manuscripts from the cold and damp. The ice on Lake Ladoga was a living entity, groaning and shifting under the weight of the supply trucks. Female drivers were common on the road of life, showing immense courage under fire. Each bag of flour delivered across the ice was considered more precious than gold. The evacuated children were often silent, their eyes reflecting horrors no child should ever see. The symphony performance required a special military operation to silence German guns during the broadcast. For the audience in the concert hall, the music was a powerful affirmation of their own humanity. The arrival of spring in 1943 brought not just warmer weather, but the tangible hope of the new land corridor. Repair crews worked constantly to fix the single railway line that was the city's new artery. The city's remaining anti-aircraft guns became a familiar part of the skyline. People began the slow process of clearing rubble and boarding up shattered windows with a renewed sense of purpose. The final Soviet offensive was a storm of steel, a coordinated attack from all sides. The sound of the Red Army's final barrage was described as a continuous, rolling thunder. As the news of liberation spread, strangers embraced in the streets, united by shared survival. The first unrestricted food supplies led to tears of joy and disbelief. The process of identifying the dead and burying them in mass graves began, a grim but necessary task. The city of Leningrad had not merely survived, it had prevailed, becoming a symbol of national fortitude. The siege had forged an unbreakable bond among its survivors. The air raids of 1941 often came at night, heralded by the terrifying wail of sirens. People took shelter in crowded, damp cellars, listening to the explosions above. The winter of 1941 turned the city's canals into solid highways of ice. Hunger erased social status. Professors, artists, and workers were all equal in the breadlines. The bourgeoisie, a small, makeshift metal stove, became the center of every home. Death from dystrophy became the official, sanitized term for starvation. The road of life was also a road of sorrow, as many evacuees were too weak to survive the journey. The city's university continued to hold lectures, sometimes with only a handful of starving students attending. The spring thaw of 1942 revealed the grim toll of the winter, as bodies emerged from the melting snow. Despite the blockade, Leningrad's factories never stopped producing weapons and munitions for the front. The breaking of the blockade in 1943 was celebrated with tears and a shared, meager feast. The final year of the siege was a slow, grinding return to a semblance of normalcy, under constant threat. The liberation in 1944 felt like a sudden, brilliant dawn after an endless night. Children who had known nothing but siege saw new foods like oranges for the very first time. The city's survivors would forever be known as Blokadniki, a title of immense honor and sorrow. The siege was a crucible that burned away everything but the core of human endurance. The initial disbelief in 1941 quickly turned into a citywide effort to build fortifications. The first air raid siren sent a wave of panic through the unprepared population. The winter darkness was so complete that people could get lost in their own neighborhoods. People read by the dim, flickering light of a koptilka, a simple lamp made from a tin and a wick in oil. The sound of the metronome broadcast over the radio network was a constant heartbeat for the dying city. When the metronome ticked slowly, it meant an air raid was in progress. When it ticked quickly, it meant all was clear. The performance of the Leningrad Symphony was an act of defiance against the silence of death. The Victory Gardens of 1943 were a symbol of life's persistence against all odds. The partial breaking of the siege allowed for the delivery of letters, reconnecting separated families. The final offensive in 1944 was met with a surge of energy from the city's defenders and workers. The moment of liberation was a chaotic, overwhelming flood of emotion. The scars on the city's magnificent palaces would be preserved as a reminder of the siege. The story of Leningrad is a lesson in the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human courage.